Book 4 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maggie Russell, New York, New York. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Book of the Spiritual Man. An interpretation by Charles Johnston. Book 4. Sutra 1. Psychic and spiritual powers may be inborn, or they may be gained by the use of drugs, or by incantations, or by fervor, or by meditation. Spiritual powers have been enumerated and described in the preceding section. They are the normal powers of the spiritual man, the antitype, the divine edition, of the powers of the natural man. Through these powers, the spiritual man stands, sees, hears, speaks in the spiritual world, as the physical man stands, sees, hears, speaks in the natural world. There is a counterfeit presentment of the spiritual man in the world of dreams, a shadow lord of shadows, who has his own dreamy powers of vision, of hearing, of movement. He has left the natural without reaching the spiritual. He has set forth from the shore, but has not gained the further verge of the river. He is borne along by the stream, with no foothold on either shore. Leaving the actual, he has fallen short of the real, caught in the limbo of vanities and delusions. The cause of this aberrant phantasm is always the worship of a false, vain self, the lord of dreams, within one's own breast. This is the psychic man, lord of delusive and bewildering psychic powers. Spiritual powers, like intellectual or artistic gifts, may be inborn, the fruit, that is, of seeds planted and reared with toil in a former birth. So also the powers of the psychic man may be inborn, a delusive harvest from seeds of delusion. Psychical powers may be gained by drugs, as poverty, shame, debasement may be gained by the self-same drugs. In their action, they are baneful, cutting the man off from consciousness of the restraining power of his divine nature, so that his forces break forth exuberant, like the laughter of drunkards, and he sees and hears things delusive. While sinking, he believes that he has risen, growing weaker. He thinks himself full of strength. Beholding illusions, he takes them to be true. Such are the powers gained by drugs. They are wholly psychic, since the real powers, the spiritual, can never be so gained. Incantations are affirmations of half-truths concerning spirit and matter, what is and what is not, which work upon the mind and slowly build up a wraith of powers and a delusive well-being. These, too, are of the psychic realm of dreams. Lastly, there are the true powers of the spiritual man, built up and realized in meditation, through reverent obedience to spiritual law, to the pure condition of being in the divine realm. Sutra 2. The transfer of powers from one venture to another comes through the flow of the natural creative forces. Here, if we can perceive it, is the whole secret of spiritual birth, growth, and life. Spiritual being, like all being, is but an expression of the self, of the inherent power and being of Atma. Inherent in the self are consciousness and will, which have as their lordly heritage the wide sweep of the universe throughout eternity, for the self is one with the eternal. And the consciousness of the self may make itself manifest as seeing, hearing, tasting, feeling, or whatsoever perceptive powers there may be, just as the white sunlight may divide into many colored rays. So may the will of the self manifest itself in the uttering of words, or in handling, or in moving, and whatever powers of action there are throughout the 7 worlds. Where the self is, there will its powers be. It is but a question of the vesture through which these powers shall shine forth, and wherever the consciousness and desire of the ever-creative self are fixed, there will a vesture be built up. Where the heart is, there will the treasure be also. Since through the ages the desire of the self has been toward the natural world, wherein the self sought to mirror himself, that he may know himself, therefore a vesture of natural elements came into being, through which blossomed forth the self's powers of perceiving and of will, the power to see, to hear, to speak, to walk, to handle. And when the self, thus come to self-consciousness, and, with it, to a knowledge of his imprisonment, shall set his desire on the divine and real world, and raise his consciousness thereto, the spiritual vesture shall be built up for him there, with its expression of his inherent powers. Nor will migration thither be difficult for the self, since the divine is no strange or foreign land for him, but the house of his home, where he dwells from everlasting. Sutra 3. The apparent, immediate cause is not the true cause of the creative nature powers, but, like the husbandman in his field, it takes obstacles away. The husbandman tills his field, breaking up the clods of earth into fine mold, penetrable to air and rain. He sows his seed, carefully covering it, for fear of birds and the wind. He waters the seed-laden earth, turning the little rills from the irrigation tank now this way and that, removing obstacles from the channels, until the even how of water vitalizes the whole field. And so the plants germinate and grow, first the blade, then the ear, then the full corn in the ear. But it is not the husbandman who makes them grow. It is, first, the miraculous plasmic power in the grain of seed, which brings forth after its kind. Then the alchemy of sunlight, which, in the presence of the green coloring matter of the leaves, gathers hydrogen from the water and carbon from the gases in the air, and mingles them in the hydrocarbons of plant growth. And finally, the wholly occult vital powers of the plant itself, stored up through ages and flowing down from the primal sources of life. The husbandman but removes the obstacles. He plants and waters, but God gives the increase. So with the finer husbandman of diviner fields. He tills and sows, but the growth of the spiritual man comes through the surge and flow of divine, creative forces and powers. Here again, God gives the increase. The divine self puts forth, for the manifestation of its powers, a new and finer vesture, the body of the spiritual man. Sutra 4. Vestures of consciousness are built up in conformity with the feeling of selfhood. The self, says a great teacher, in turn attaches itself to 3 vestures. First, to the physical body, then to the finer body, and thirdly, to the causal body. Finally, it stands forth radiant, luminous, joyous, as the self. When the self attributes itself to the physical body, there arises the states of bodily consciousness, built up about the physical self. When the self, breaking through this first illusion, begins to see and feel itself in the finer body, to find selfhood there, then the states of consciousness of the finer body come into being. Or, to speak exactly, the finer body and its states of consciousness arise and grow together. But the self must not dwell permanently there. It must learn to find itself in the causal body, to build up the wide and luminous fields of consciousness that belong to that. Nor must it dwell forever there, for there remains the 4th state, the divine, with its own splendor and everlastingness. It is all a question of the states of consciousness, all a question of raising the sense of selfhood until it dwells forever in the eternal.